Hey, I'm so glad you are here with me today on the Play Scoville podcast. This is just a podcast where we talk about how play, love, and connection can help families grow together. And that's what I want to talk about today. Did you know that November is National Adoption Month? It seems like we have a month or a day for everything, doesn't it? But this one is pretty dear to my heart. In fact, right now on TikTok, I've decided to every day I tell one of my adoption stories. So if you want to know the details of how all of my children came into my life, go follow me on TikTok and watch those stories. Some are pretty long, I'm going to warn you, because I wanted to make sure I gave you the full picture of what it looked like. But today, I wanted just to talk about adoption. Whether you're a birth mom, you're an adoptee, or you're a family like mine who's grown through adoption, I just thought it would be interesting if just for a few minutes we talked about what are some of the triumphs with adoption? What are some of the challenges with adoption? What are some of the common misunderstandings? Maybe you've been adopted or you are feeling called to adopt. And so hopefully this will help you just to answer some of those questions, to talk about what it really means to be adopted and what it means to grow a family through adoption. I've spoken to so many families who, they thought they were going to be the ones that gave and taught when they adopted children, but they quickly admit that they're the ones who've learned so much through adoption. It really is something I know for me. I've learned more than I ever dreamed I would about adoption. It teaches patience, it teaches empathy, it teaches understanding that love can be chosen, that it can be built, and that it can be renewed. I do want to talk about, though, it is a story that starts with loss, a tragic loss. We wouldn't have adoption if these children had not experienced some deep loss in their family. When a birth mom chooses to place this baby for adoption, what a beautiful, unselfish gift. I don't understand how difficult it would be to have this human being growing inside of you and choosing a different path. You're choosing life for them, and you're choosing a life that doesn't include you. So I think that is a very selfless act. And so I just want to pause. I'm going to try not to cry, but I just want to say thank you to the women who have faced that decision to choose life and to choose a life plan that doesn't include them. I remember when my first son, John Michael, was adopted, I didn't really understand what to call his birth mother to him and help it be developmentally appropriate, because birth mother is confusing. And so what I landed on was tummy grower. And I talked about how my tummy was broken and my tummy couldn't grow babies. And so God gave us a tummy grower who, of course, is his birth mom. And that tummy grower grew John Michael inside of her and then allowed us to be the parents to him. And he seemed to understand that. Years later, when John Michael turned 18, his biological family did find him. And I think within 24 hours, his biological moms, grandparents, siblings all added him as friends on Facebook. And I was totally a fan of that. I was a fan of him reconnecting with that part of his story. I think it's super important if children want to connect with how that story started, because I think most people at some point they question that loss. And I'm listening to a book right now called The Body Keeps the Score. It's a great book, by the way. And it also talks about how our body does remember things subconsciously, even if we don't recognize that. And I would imagine that for these children whose story started with loss, that their body feels that. And so to address that at some point is going to be very healing for them emotionally, to go through that loss and discuss that loss and maybe even reconnect with their biological family. Out of all my children that I've adopted, most of them have at least met part of their biological family. I know Joshua did not meet any of his, other than his half-brother who also lives in Georgia. But I know Carlos has now met his biological mother, and I got to be there when Carlos met his mom. That was so special for me. Melvin has reconnected with his biological mother. John Michael online has met his biological mother, not in person. And then Jackson and Grace, they've met Grace's biological father. They have not met their biological mother, but maybe one day. And Jackson is still curious about his biological father. He's not found him yet either. So helping these kids walk through this loss, I think it does grow you too, because Maybe you didn't realize that was part of the story or that what you were signing up for. But I know for me and my family, I have always said to my children, listen, as long as individuals are healthy, I want you to be able to have a relationship with them. I'm concerned about how that relationship's going to impact you. So if this individual is not healthy emotionally, then I want you to be cautious in that relationship. But I do want you to pursue any relationship that with biological family that you want to. Just make sure you set boundaries if needed and keep that relationship healthy. And each kid has had to deal with that differently. And some do have a relationship with their biological family, some do not. After meeting them, they've chosen not to continue that relationship. And that's totally on them as adults. But it is something that, typically in a biological family, you don't have to deal with that if you're an adoptive family that you do. And so I try to help walk my kids through that it is part of their story. By the way, speaking of their stories, they've all given me permission to share part of their stories. I wouldn't do it without their permission because it's their story and their story to tell. And so anything that I share, know that it's because my kids have given me permission to do that. And I do think that it's sacred, right? Adoption is sacred. And I think we imagine this, we see it, the Hallmark movie situation, right? This child is lonely and longing for a family, and this family shows up and they rescue them, and it's magical, and should be on a Christmas card. And, honestly, it's just not like that. It is magical. And I do remember the first time I met all of my children, whether they were biological or adopted. I remember that first meeting, and it does feel like magic, but adoption isn't magical. Adoption is a lot of work. It is a lot of showing up. It is a lot of recognizing that just because you now have filled out paperwork, this child is not necessarily going to feel at home in your family. It might, depending on when you adopted, what their story was before. And for me, I've adopted children as young as 2 days old that joined my family. And then I've also brought adults into my home. I think Melvin was 23 even when he joined our family. So they've come in at different stages and different ages with different trauma, different background. And you have to meet them where they are. You can't have this expectation of all of a sudden it's going to be instant, even with the younger ones. I mean, Joshua was 10 when he came home, and it was pretty seamless, but there still were some struggles. For example, for Joshua, I remember he really didn't learn coping skills about when he was upset or when he had to process anger or he had to process sadness. And so his coping skill became he would go to sleep. He would just go crawl in his bed and go to sleep. And that continued when he came home. So if he got upset or if he got in trouble, he just went to his room and checked out and just disassociated. And so we had to work through that and help him stay present in his body, stay present with his emotions, to feel that pain of sadness, of anger, and help process that. But we've got to be aware that it takes work in adoption. It takes effort in adoption. And you've got to recognize that so much of it isn't even about you. And I think when we see children who came, especially from a traumatic background, and then we bring them into our home and they do things that we think are intentional to hurt us, you've got to get curious instead of angry. You've got to question, where is this coming from? So many times kids manipulate, they triangulate, they do all of these things as a self-protection because they have had so many traumatic situations, whether they've been disappointed, they don't know who they can trust, they feel abandoned. And so you have to kind of parent outside the box. I always recommend Karen Purvis's book called The Connected Child. Such a great book in helping you navigate parenting an adopted child. Also, there's a fabulous book called Building the Bonds of Attachment that I really recommend if you are struggling. And it's interesting because people do ask me, is there a difference between my biological children and my adopted children? And I would say, I mean, not in the way that I love them, but it is different sometimes when you see like genetics play a role. Like I see in Sarah something she does, and I'm like, oh yeah, that she gets that from me or from her dad or from Henry. That obviously I don't see. But then I see nature versus nurture. I see the nurturing in John Michael, and he has so many similarities because of the way he was nurtured and the way he was brought up, and with Jackson and the way that, he treats people and he's kind and all these things. And that's from the way he was brought up. And so, yes, of course it's different, but it's not different as far as the love for them. I mean, my kids are my kids. It's not really how they came into my family. It's just the fact that they are my family. and I would do anything for them, as I know you would for your kids. So I think if you are out there and you're thinking about adopting, what I always advise is that go in eyes wide open. Don't see it as you're saving someone, you're rescuing someone. That is not what is happening at all. Most of these children don't even want to be rescued, don't want to be, taken away from what they know, because especially if you're doing an international adoption, right? You're moving them to a country where sometimes they don't speak the language, the food is different. Everything is a change. Listen, adoption is complex, and I think, it's beautiful and it's complex. And I think you have to be willing. One thing I'll say is if you are not great at talking about things, then think about adoption, because you have to be willing to have some uncomfortable conversations as your kids grow. Like I mentioned before, we always said that, these birth moms, I referred to them as tummy growers when my kids were little, because kids need things presented concretely, and birth mother was such an abstract concept for them. So to put it in that very concrete, someone else grew you in their tummy. When you came out of their tummy, they gave you to us. We got to be your parents. And so we are your parents. We are so grateful for your tummy grower, because we never want to take anything away. And of course, as they got older, they began to understand that the tummy grower was their birth mother, as it should be. But you've got to be willing to sit in the uncomfortable, because there'll be a time that kids might say, I wonder where I came from. I wonder what my tummy grower is like. I remember Grace specifically one time, she began to fantasize about her birth mother and what she looked like. And I was fortunate that I did have a picture of her, so I could go get that picture and give it to Grace. And Grace carried it around, and I think she kind of imagined what that relationship could have been. And you have to be able to sit in those uncomfortable feelings with them. What was their family like? Do they have other siblings? Jackson and Grace, who are biological siblings, a few years ago, they found out that they have 3 more brothers, and they were full siblings to Grace. And so Grace got to meet them, and a younger brother that they've gotten to meet as well. So you have to be willing to realize, hey, it's complicated. It's one big, open family in some ways. I mean, of course you have boundaries, but that things might, come around and they might change and someone else might show up, and you've got to be willing to sit in that. So I would definitely encourage you, if you are thinking about adopting, think about, am I comfortable with those hard conversations? Can I have those tough conversations with my children, with my partner? And can we move forward with this plan knowing that? I think that's super important. But it's, what I love about it, though, is that how much it's grown me and how much it's helped me look beyond my bubble, because having to sit in those uncomfortable conversations and having to help my children navigate that. And there's different for all of them, right? All the kids' stories are different and their family situations different. So helping them navigate that really has grown me and has stretched me. And so I'm thankful for it. I'm thankful that my kids are curious, and I just get curious with them. I think that we need to remember that we are helping these children build trust and build safety and build self-understanding and resilience. And it's so valuable that you would sit in that and talk with them and help them grow through that. I think all my kids have a different view of adoption because they've lived it, whether they were the adopted ones or maybe they're the biological ones and have all these adopted siblings. But I do think they all value it because it's been a part of our family. And when we stopped adopting, it was after Phoebe left. I remember, and if you don't know the story of Phoebe, you'll need to watch my TikTok and you'll get to hear the story of Phoebe. But once Phoebe left after 3 years, my children expressed that they wanted to be done, that our family felt full, and that these were parts that were hard for them too. And so that was our last adoption or attempted adoption, was Phoebe. Let's go back to, you've chosen to adopt. You're bringing a new child into your family. How do you help that child connect with you? How do you help that child become part of the family? And I think it's real important for you to use play. Again, play, I'm so thankful that that is my background, because it is such a natural way to bring kids in, no matter where they're from. You bring them in. Play is universal. So play is also a great opportunity for kids to play out scenarios. You get to learn a lot by observing their play. And play builds connection. Play is an easy way to build connection. You sitting next to your child. You don't even have to be playing the same thing, but you being near while they play. And if they invite you in, you play with them. And that is a great form of connection. I remember when Carlos came into our family, and remember Carlos is 18. Carlos had never been read to. Like you read to your little bitty kids, and we read to them all the time. My 18-year-old had never been read to. So one day I grabbed some of my favorite books and I just climbed in the bed next to him and sat down and just said, "Hey, I want to share with you some of my favorite books that I read to the kids when they were little." And you might think that's odd or weird, but I wanted to help recreate that connecting moment. That's what reading does. Not only does reading build language skills and reading, helps a child get ready to read, but reading to our children is a connecting activity. And I wanted to have that connection point with Carlos. So I sat and I read children's books to him one day, and he actually thought it was hilarious and enjoyed it. But I knew it was a connecting moment for us even then. So be willing to do those things. Think specifically, what are the ways that I can connect with this child? How do I bring them in? And play is definitely a way to say, I'm here. You belong here. I belong here. We're here together. And it helps. And there is something about reading books together that does that. One of my favorite books about adoption is Tell Me Again About the Day I Was Born by Jamie Lee Curtis. I love that book. And what I love is the illustrations as much as the words because it's so real life, right? Birth children and have adopted children. It doesn't matter how the children get there. It's still chaos when the children arrive, right? There's still bottles everywhere. There's diapers everywhere. You're not getting enough sleep. There's the worry on your face. You're half dressed. Your hair is gray. All those same things that you think of as a new mom. It doesn't matter how the kids come. It is the same. So that's a great book. Tell Me Again About the Day I Was Born by Jamie Lee Curtis, and look that up. So you want to do that. And if you need to get some professional help, do that early. Don't be scared to find a therapist that can help you and your child connect. I do hear from some moms who say, you know what, I didn't attach to my child initially. I thought I would, and I didn't. And so don't assume that that's going to be instant. It might take some time for that bond to build for both of you, and give it that time. Be willing to give it that time because, it's just part of the process. And just know that, you know what, this is a journey. Adoption isn't a once the paperwork is signed, it's over. You have to be willing to stay on that journey with your children. And again, answer some of those tough questions and be willing to sit in some of those tough moments. But if you do, I guarantee you that you'll be glad you did because it is growth. It is growth on your part, it is growth on their part. And if we can help our children be healed emotionally from that initial loss, then what a great gift we have given them. And also, it might bring up in you some of your own loss from your childhood. Maybe you weren't adopted, but maybe you did have some childhood pain that you're recognizing and seeing it in your child. So don't be scared to talk about that too. And know that this journey is beautiful. It is tough. It is worth it. And I pray that you think about it, adding a child to your family through adoption. And if I can support you on this journey, I want to do so. So you reach out to me. You can send me a message. You can email me at Kathy@KathyEggers.com and go watch my TikToks and learn how I got all of my kids. There's some crazy stories in there. I don't even believe it. As I'm retelling the stories, I'm like, are these even real? And I lived them. And they are real. And they are what made my family unique, diverse, full, challenging at times, beautiful. I wouldn't have it any other way. So thanks so much for listening.